Police! Suspect found! Show me hands! Get your hands in the air!
The recent Netflix show Adolescence follows the tragic story of a 13-year-old who is accused of the murder of a classmate. It's been praised for exploring a variety of important societal issues, like the development of masculinity in young boys, the pedagogical impact of social media, and the challenges of parenthood in the digital age. But perhaps more than anything, the show gathered attention because of one particular design choice, which is that each episode is shot in 1 hour-long continuous take. And I have mixed feelings about it.
Oners are so stupid. It's just the director jacking off while making everyone else's lives miserable. Audiences do not care about this shit.
Now, to be clear, I think the show itself, the story of it, is really, really good. It's also not that I'm not impressed by the filmmaking here. For while you often see long takes now, which are really just like 4 or 5 different takes that are artificially stitched together using digital effects, the continuous shot in Adolescence, by their own account, was 100% real.
I mean, even like 1917 would use whip pans to connect scenes.
We're not doing whip pans as a true oner. There's no tricks. We're just gonna do it.
But here's the thing. I just can't help but wonder why. Why the long take? Because every time I see one, I just keep getting distracted by the craft of it, by the nuts and bolts of the construction. I'm like looking for hidden cuts, I'm feeling the stress of all those difficult transitions. It's like I'm no longer watching the story as spectator, but as cameraman, which is a frustration that was turned up to 11 here in Adolescence because, again, its long take literally spans the entire runtime of the story. The cynic in me can't help but suspect that this, at least in some small part, is exactly why the long take has become more popular, especially now that they're relatively easy to create artificially. It's because they are noticed. It certainly feels like whenever they are used, they immediately become a part of the conversation, which in turn means that they've also become an undeniable marketing tool. And more specifically, a marketing tool that always wants to one-up itself to generate more engagement. You know, you thought this long take in Extraction was cool, just wait until you see the even bigger one in Extraction 2. Sure, you've seen a 10-minute long take, but how about a 30-minute one? How about we make it span an entire hour-long episode? It's like the long take is no longer truly about storytelling, but also increasingly an exercise in vanity.
Are you kidding me? The oner is the ultimate cinematic achievement, you know? It's like the perfect marriage of artistry and technicality. You got Birdman, Children of Men, Goodfellas, you know?
Fortunately, I'm not a complete cynic either, and there's another part in me that also senses that undeniable magnetism of the long take, that understands how they are not just impressive from a technical point of view, but also clearly do something that grabs our attention on a more instinctive and emotional level, that creates a certain mode of engagement that arguably wouldn't be the same without it. And today, that's what I want to explore. Why is the long take used in the first place? What narrative value can it serve? Which feelings can it invoke? And perhaps most importantly, will I be able to use this to resolve some of my own frustrations with it? Will this also explain, will this justify Adolescence's rather extreme application of this remarkable cinematic tool? This video is brought to you by Mubi. Go to mubi.com/likestoriesofold to get 30 days of great cinema for free. So, I've been working my way through a long list of movies with long takes. And the first and probably most obvious quality I noted down is that they can help ground the viewer in a specific place and perspective. By locking onto one character, we follow their story as they are experiencing it. We see what they are seeing and go through events in real time exactly as they do. Some movies even do this by literally making the camera a character within the story. In the recent Steven Soderbergh movie Presence, for example, our perspective is limited to that of a ghost haunting a family in their house. And in Enter the Void, we are also placed in a first-person perspective that gets quite trippy as that person dies and his disembodied consciousness starts floating around. Most often though, the camera won't take on this literal first-person perspective, but it can still feel like it's a phantom character of sorts that the audience can project themselves onto, as if becoming an avatar in the movie. Children of Men and Saving Private Ryan are probably the prime examples of this, as in both movies you can often feel the physical presence of the cameraman as they move along with the main characters, and of the camera itself as it gets dirtied and bumped around. It really makes you part of the action and the drama, which, in turn, immerses us into the subjective experience of the characters. It gives us a direct reflection of what they're going through. The 2015 movie Son of Saul achieves a similar effect through a slightly different method. Here too we find many long takes locked onto an individual character, in this case, a Jewish prisoner inside a concentration camp. But instead of making us feel like we're walking alongside him, the camera is more disembodied, the field of view more restricted, and the focus is often centered on the character itself rather than on what is happening around him. We also see this in last year's The Brutalist, where the gaze of the camera and the length of the shot invokes a certain claustrophobia, and gives the impression of a world pressing down on a character so forcefully that it becomes hard to perceive anything else, to see the full scope of what is really going on. In this sense, the long take here doesn't directly mimic the experience of the characters, but rather reflects more symbolically their emotional reality, as it were. And this brings us to a more general quality of the long take, which is its effectiveness at eliciting certain feelings, and in particular, its capacity to create tension. One of the most famous long takes in movie history is this one, from the 1958 Orson Welles movie Touch of Evil. The shot starts with the planting of a car bomb, and then follows that car as it moves along various scenes and characters, all the while building anticipation towards that inevitable moment. Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, a movie that is entirely presented as one unbroken take, also has a similar focal point of tension as two men commit a murder and then host a dinner party with the corpse hidden right under their noses. For a more modern version of this kind of long take suspense, there's 1917, also presented as one unbroken shot, and also giving us a ticking clock as two soldiers set out to prevent an assault that is bound to get an entire battalion of soldiers killed.
1,600 men, your brother among them.
Besides the pressure of time, 1917 also demonstrates how the long take can enhance the tension of struggle, the tension that arises from having to overcome certain obstacles. Gravity, starring Sandra Bullock, is also a fantastic example of how complicated tasks in high-danger situations become all the more nail-biting because of the long take and its unrelenting commitment to real time. It's so effective, in fact, that it even makes strangely captivating this comparatively harmless sequence in Tarkovsky's Nostalgia, where a man tries to perform a ritual in which he has to carry a burning candle from one end of a pool to the other. Despite there being no actual danger here, the shot nevertheless refuses to release us until the task is done, which becomes increasingly tense as the flame keeps going out and the man has to start all over again from the beginning. Even more stripped down is this shot from Once Upon a Time in Anatolia, in which an apple falls from a tree, rolls into a creek, and that's about it. There's quite literally nothing of consequence that happens here, aside from how the long take here seems to hold up a mirror to the audience, as if deliberately reflecting how easily we can become fixated on even the most insignificant of events, and how quickly we build anticipation around them. What we also see here is how the long take can also be employed to slow things down, to invoke calm and quiet. Aside from the wonderful work of Nuri Bilge Ceylan, there's also movies like Chantal Akerman's Shen Dielman, where the long take eases us into the quiet monotony of a woman's life in an apartment in Belgium. And in Bela Tarr's Satan Tango, the story opens with this slow, almost hypnotic tracking shot of cows moving through a desolate farmyard, which is but one of many long takes in his filmography that feature a little more than people walking around, sitting and talking, going about their day. What's really happening here, however, is that the long takes are used to dictate flow. They are setting the pace of the story. Every long take does this consciously or unconsciously. After all, if the shot as you film it is exactly how it ends up in the final movie, then all the editing that is usually done during post-production now has to be done on the day of filming itself.
What?
This might just be the most tricky aspect of incorporating long takes into a story. There's just no way to go back afterwards to speed things up or slow them down, which can be a real disadvantage, unless you're really good at filmmaking, like Steven Spielberg for example, who often uses the long take rather inconspicuously by efficiently creating multiple compositions in one shot. You know, it's that phenomenon which every frame a painting once referred to as the Spielberg oner. Closely related to dictating the pace is the establishing of atmosphere. Again, every long take sets some kind of mood. So far we've seen gritty, grounded realism, we've covered the sort of subjective entrapment of Son of Saul, and when it comes to that specific moodiness of Bela Tarr's dilapidated Hungarian landscapes, there's obviously a lot of elements that contribute to that feeling, but I've always felt his long takes are certainly among them, as the camera here creates this distinctively somber spectator to a world suffering a slow decay. There are, of course, plenty of other examples here, like how Martin Scorsese uses the long take to establish energetic moods of wealth, success and status, which Paul Thomas Anderson also did in Boogie Nights. Or consider how Stanley Kubrick created that distinctive feeling of psychological dread with those long hallway sequences in The Shining. Also worth mentioning are the long takes of Alejandro Iñárritu, who uses them to give this otherworldly quality to his movies, as if they're taking place on a slightly different plane of existence that we briefly get to venture into as this almost ghost-like presence. Lastly, the long take is also just very effective at invoking a feeling of grandeur, of cinematic ecstasy. This is probably most obvious in action scenes, which seem to really like the long take as a sort of natural extension of what Jackie Chan already understood decades ago. That action is more impactful when we actually get to see what's going on. Especially in the subset of action movies where the stunt work is the main appeal. The long take is a great way to heighten the physicality of the action and the impressiveness of the performances. I mean, look at this hospital sequence from John Woo's Hard Boiled, which is just... Beyond the action sequence, there are also scenes like this one from the movie Atonement, in which a soldier arrives on the beach at Dunkirk and in which the grandeur invoked by the long take conveys something about the sheer scope of this historic event. Or there's this famous funeral procession from Soy Cuba that starts at the level of the individual and then rises up to give us a perspective of the full crowd. Such wow moments, however, don't necessarily have to go this big. No, they can also be smaller. In the Korean movie Burning, for example, there's an extended shot of a woman dancing against the sunset that is absolutely mesmerizing in ways I can't quite explain. The The same goes for this shot from Bardo, where a man's shadow moves across the desert until he eventually... Tarkovsky's The Mirror is also filled with moments like these. Moments in which the long take elevates the cinematic experience into the realm of poetry. Most of the shots we've already discussed do this to some extent. By letting us sit with whatever is being captured in the frame, they create a certain spellbinding effect that becomes less about what the movie is trying to convey and more about what you yourself bring into it. It's that magic of cinema that is hard to dissect into clear properties and dynamics, which is what I've always loved about it, but which is also what problematized the long take for me in the first place. Because when you're trying to explain, trying to justify something as ineffable as poetic value, you're inevitably going to clash with that initial question of vanity. When does it just become too much? This shot from Satan Tango is about 8 minutes long. Would it not have had the same effect if it was 5 minutes? Did 1917 really have to present itself as one unbroken shot? Did Adolescence?
Are you done?
I mean, based on what we've discussed, we can definitely articulate some merits of its long take format. Especially in that first episode, I think it really locks you into the confusion and chaos that Jamie and his parents were experiencing during that first fateful hour.
What have you done?
And I love how that last episode has a rather unique sense of inescapability as the family is now trying to cope with the reality of what happened, which creates its own form of dreadful anticipation even in the most innocuous of moments.
Next, please.
But with the long take being this long, there were also moments where I questioned its value. Most notably, while the show locks us into a real-time chronology, it doesn't lock us into a specific perspective as we shift between multiple characters throughout each episode. And so, if the story doesn't have a fixed point of view, then why did the cinematography did have to have one? Why have that awkward staging where characters would pass each other right at the end of one conversation and at the beginning of another? Why not just go for a small cut in between those transition points? Is there some deeper experiential value here that I'm missing? Some deeper meaning that eludes articulation? Or was it really just to be able to have that one shot for each episode accolade? And if so, if the show is ultimately designed around its technical aspiration rather than its story, then wouldn't that be a bad thing? Wouldn't that negate the poetry of it and turn the whole thing into a mere gimmick? Questions like these could be asked of any long take, but for me they do seem to become more pressing the longer a long take goes on. It's like there already is something about this cinematic tool that defies analysis, that feels like it cannot be fully reduced to its narrative purpose or to some other expression of merit. But when stretched to this length, when used this radically, the effect of it, the purpose of it, both for better and for worse, just becomes all the more nebulous, which in the end might also be exactly why I do feel so drawn towards this subject. I started writing this not because I had strong feelings about the long takes in Adolescence, but rather because I wasn't sure how I felt about them. And to be honest, I still don't. Why go through all this extra effort to capture something in one unbroken shot that would have been just as fine, if not better, with a few cuts? Was going that extra mile really in service of the narrative, or did it transgress into vanity at some point? And if so, would it be possible to define that boundary, to determine where artistic integrity turned into a dogmatic commitment? I guess the deeper question here is, why tell a story in one way when it can just as well be told in another? Which is a question that has been on my mind a lot recently. Not just when it comes to long takes, but to many, if not all, aspects of filmmaking. For someone who makes a living analyzing stories, it's like a minor crisis of identity that recurs from time to time. It's that coming to terms with the more ineffable qualities of art, and that feeling of having reached the limitations of what can be meaningfully articulated about them. So, why the long take? Well, maybe it just felt like the right choice to the filmmakers. And considering how well the audience, myself included, responded to the show, maybe that was valid enough. Despite including about 50 examples of incredible cinematic achievements, I am, of course, still but scraping the surface of what the world of cinema has to offer. And to dive in even deeper, I highly recommend you check out friend of the channel and my personal favorite online cinema, Mubi. You may have already seen me talk about some of their exclusive movies, as every year at least one of them seems to make it into my best movies of the year video. Movies like The Humans, The Settlers, The Substance and After Sun were all incredible. Mubi also just released Bring Them Down, a brooding Rashomon-like thriller about men trapped in generational cycles of violence. I watched this the other day and thought it was really well done. It was quiet but tense and features fantastic performances from Barry Keoghan and Christopher Abbott. Beyond that, there is, of course, so much more to discover here. From timeless classics to modern masterpieces, each movie is carefully selected to bring you the best that cinema has to offer. And if you sign up using my personal link, that's mubi.com/likestoriesofold, you can dive in right away with an extended free trial. That's 30 days of great cinema for free with mubi.com/likestoriesofold.